History says that English settlers were lonesome in their quest to America as they escaped the religious retributions of England. In the 17th century, England was full of blacks, or what they describe as blackamoors. Today we call them Moors. It is indeed a fact that blacks traveled to America with pilgrims and Puritans, and they were not slaves. When you hear historians speak of blacks designing and building the structures of Washington, D.C., this is not just slave labor as history alludes. This is engineering, architecture, geometry, arithmetics, and mathematics. This is a high intelligence of people constructing an entire city. When you also go back in history and study the 17th and 18th century prior to the Constitution of 1776, you will see how Moors were a big influence on the early policies of America. In summation, Moors who weren't indigenous to this nation helped create this nation politically, and they helped change this nation spiritually. But most importantly, they played a huge role in the enslavement of the indigenous blacks of this nation through the institution of religion. The teaching of Christianity in America towards blacks became a strategy early as the mid-1690s. White colonists operating as missionaries were baptizing indigenous blacks from New York, Philadelphia, South Carolina, Virginia, Georgia, and so forth. Their sole job was to teach and instruct the black natives of America Christianity. This was not an easy task, as most blacks practiced apostasy, which meant the total denial of any base religion. This is what prompted the campaign of persuasion and propaganda. In 1700, the Society for the Propagation of the Gospel in Foreign Parts was incorporated by King William III, who happened to be a Moor also. Officially, this was the order from the Crown of England to create a curricula specifically to instruct the indigenous blacks of America Christianity. The only blacks at the time who could speak multiple languages as well as ancient tongues were the African descent Moors. White colonists was not trusted by indigenous blacks, aka Native Americans, because they were foreign. They will only communicate with those who look like them. White colonists understood this immediately because physically they could not defeat us, but mentally they could exploit us off of our natural ability to be civil and humane. That is a black people gift. That is a trait that we have, and it is also our weakness. We have an ability to be civil and humane with everybody, but everybody don't have the ability to be civil and humane with us. When you look and study history closely, Europeans have never brought civility to no country they have ever invaded. Yet they have always exploited the native people by extorting or convincing a small amount of them to carry out their plan for them against their own people. So when we talk about Uncle Tom, Sambo's, Coons, that's nothing new. Nothing new. In 1701, the Reverend George Keith and John Talbot are considered the first traveling preachers who covered a tract of 800 miles between North Carolina and Massachusetts. After the round-trip gospel tour, Keith and Talbot would report back to the society, who would adjust the necessary funding and sermon techniques to engineer more Negroes into the faith. Religion is a spiritual weapon of conquest by those who sought to conquer a people of that land. So the plan in America was to transform Negroes into the faith of Jesus Christ. How did they do this? For the most part, in those times, English white men were rude, violent, savage, and hateful. Indigenous blacks did not trust them based on their behavior. The first missionaries in America understood this also, so they displayed the opposite behavior. Yet internally, they were just like the plantation owners, but they needed to deceive the people in order for their plan to work. In 1712, many missionaries attempted to convert Negroes into the Christian faith using Christian catechism. The Negroes at that time, which were many, attempted to overthrow the English of their Christianized footprint. Several of them were executed in the name of Christianity. This is when lynching, flogging, whiplashings became the chief fear tactic for the missionaries, which would be administered by the slave masters, who primarily weren't religious. Fear and religion, it goes hand in hand. The indigenous blacks of this nation, our ancestors, began getting baptized in droves. From the year 1712 to 1750, tens of thousands of blacks were documented as joining the Christian faith through baptism. That was forced upon our people through fear tactics. During this period, there was much hostility as wars were common and ongoing. Through history, they falsely characterized these wars as slave revolts and insurrections. They bombarded us with movie images to describe their version of slavery, and this propaganda is still going on 400 years later. There are two main factions of religions surfacing in America, but they both held the same agenda: Methodists and Baptists. Methodism was a construct developed mainly in the North, as Baptist was constructed mainly in the South. This is what we call a schism. By 1787, there were over 300,000 Baptist and Methodist pledging blacks across America. However, the majority of them still didn't take hold of the Christianity faith fully. It wasn't until the colonists decided to select some of the black men who were smart, who could read, and who held influence of the other blacks. These certain black men would become clergy under the instruction of Christianity. These men would preach to the blacks for certain concessions, like their immediate families not having to work in the fields, or they could travel to other plantations and preach the Christianity faith. Seeing black men preach the white man's word piqued the interest of the others. There are many black men linked to being preachers and also using that platform to turn against plantation owners. The story of Nat Turner, Gabriel Prosser, and Denmark Vesey are infamous examples, but there were hundreds of others who rejected the word of the Bible but used it as a tool to turn against the colonists and slave owners.